In August 1993.
本次調査の結果、長期にかつ広範な地域にわたって慰安所が設置され、数多くの慰安婦が存在したことが認められた。慰安所は当時の軍当局の要請により設営されたものであり、慰安所の設置、管理および慰安婦の移送については旧日本軍が直接あるいは間接にこれに関与した。我々はこのような歴史の真実を回避することなく、むしろこれを歴史の教訓として直視していきたい。我々は歴史研究、歴史教育を通じてこのような問題を長く記憶に留め、同じ過ちを決して繰り返さないという固い決意を改めて表明する。
It was the first time that Japan admitted its past wrongdoings, some 50 years after World War II. However, in June 2014,
政府の中でチームを作って、そして専門家による検証ということを含めてご答弁くださいということでありましたので、冒頭申し上げたようにですね、機密ということを保持する中でそれは検討してまいりたい。
Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe has shown a will to re-examine the 1993 Kono Statement. Over 2 decades have passed since the Kono Statement was made, but Prime Minister Abe seems intent on reversing the past apology and acknowledgement.
Hello and welcome to Upfront. I'm Kang Tae-ri.
I'm Yoo Jong-soo. On today's Upfront, we discuss Japan's recent review of the Kono Statement.
And joining us for this conversation is Professor Tong Kim, a visiting scholar from Korea University. Welcome. And to my left, Dr. Bong Young-sik, Senior Research Fellow from Asan Institute for Policy Studies. What is Tokyo looking to get out of this review of the Kono Statement at this point?
Well, obviously, it has been a long strategic maneuver on the part of the Japanese government to harm or dilute the significance of the Kono Statement of 1993 that had admitted the criminal nature of what the Japanese Imperial Army did during the wartime. And in the statement itself, it says, for example, Japanese military was directly or indirectly involved in the recruit, coercing or coercing, or in some cases kidnapping some women, not just from Korea, but also other nations as well in the Southeast Asia. But I will not list all these countries. As we go on, we probably talk about those countries as well. And then their statement itself is not really graphic as what really happened during the commitment of crimes against humanity, crimes against women's rights and violation of human rights. And also, it is the rape, if you, depending on how you see it, what happened. And, but it's not that graphic, but nevertheless, they generally admitted what they did was wrong. At the same time, they expressed in their statement that they would express their sincere apologies as well as deep remorse. So that was what the substance of the statement was. Mm-hmm. But recently, ever since, well, that was a Kono time, who was the cabinet secretary. Mm-hmm. But in 2007, Abe, the incumbent prime minister of Japan, he didn't believe these comfort women, so-called, were really coerced by the Japanese military or Japanese government. He just did not believe it. And he apparently ordered one of a team of investigators to see what's in it, and the review of the whole statement and how that came about, and what it contained, what is true, what is not true, then that created uproar, not only in Seoul, but even in Washington and Beijing, elsewhere around the world. And then Japanese mitigated their position by saying that we're not going to change the substance of the state, but nevertheless we want to see how the procedure of the statement, how statement was arrived at. And at the end, they announced that it was a joint product of collaboration between South Korea and Japan. In other words, this was a diplomatic negotiated settlement, not the settlement of the issue, but the settlement of the statement. So that really was not acceptable to the South Korea or even in Washington for that matter.
Now, just to pick up on what he just said, do you agree with him? Do you think it actually worked to dilute the spirit of the Kono statement?
I agree with Dr. Kim's assessment of the Abe administration's attempt. There are two motivations behind this move. One is to insert his own personal belief as a nationalist leader that there is no concrete evidence to prove that these women were coaxed and coerced by the Japanese military.
Right.
And the second motivation is to respond to and appease the conservatives in his coalition government who question and challenges the previous liberal governments to be more forthright in terms of providing the wholehearted apology for the atrocities committed on these women.
Do you think in the big picture it's sort of in line with the Japan? I mean, it's in the headlines so much these days. It's a push for collective self-defense or cozying up with North Korea. Do you think in the big picture they're in line with each other?
It is in line with Prime Minister Abe's determination to bring Japan back or create a strong Japan, however you define the vision. In style-wise, it's very typical of the Abe administration. When the Abe administration tries to bring about fundamental changes of the Japanese political system and its understanding of history, whenever the Abe administration's attempt faced the challenge, then rather than going through at the heart of the issue, it takes the detour by maintaining the system, but rather dilute the significance of the system. For instance, the Abe administration pronounced its ambition to change the constitution so that Japan would become a normal state, right? By eliminating or revising the Article 9 of the so-called peace constitution. But when this attempt received a great deal of opposition and criticism at home and abroad, it changed its strategy and shift the focus on Article 9 of the Constitution as a target to Article 96 that defines how the Japanese Constitution can be revised. When the attempt is also facing challenges, as you very well know, it went through the cabinet decision to have reinterpretation of the Japan's right to collective self-defense. Right. And this is another case of the same strategy.
Since Abe's approval rating has dropped recently, perhaps now is the time for him to change course. What are your thoughts?
My thought about that correlation between Abe's approval rating and his chance to take different position on this issue is that it is too early to expect the administration to take a different position because yes, there has been a decline in terms of Abe administration's approval rating, but there's no viable alternative to Prime Minister Abe. And his Abenomics has been more or less successful. So there is no urgent need for Japanese constituents to think about his replacement, regardless of his policy position.
I can back up some of the things Dr. Pong said, that is, as early as April in 1997, there was a Japanese publication called Bunkai Shinju published an article alleging that the Gono statement was a joint product of collaboration between South Korean diplomats and Japanese counterparts. And that said, that created an opportunity for the Japanese righteous right-wingers to deny the truthfulness and veracity of the Gono statement. And because statement was not just simply announced of the diplomatic channels, but nevertheless they did their own research, and there was enough ample evidence. Each case was supported by, although they did not list any numbers of these victims and so forth, but there were clear evidence was there. I think the trouble with the whole issue begins with the nature and also thinking of Prime Minister Abe. He's the one who even questioned the definition of what invasion is. He denied the Japanese was invaded. He said, he alleged that there is no agreed upon definition of what invasion constitutes. Constitutes invasion in an academic community or international community, saying that, well, we didn't do nothing wrong. And that's the beginning of the trouble on these things. And he did that way after the Gono statement was issued. Barack Obama was here in Seoul last April. And he didn't talk about other things. He, of course, talked about North Korean nuclear issue, but he made a very clear, strong statement on the topic of comfort women. Let me just read it. I think this is exactly, I'd like to quote him. He said, what happened to comfort women was a terrible, egregious violation of human rights. Those women were violated in ways that even in the midst of a war was shocking. And that's a very strong statement. Of course, it was Hillary Clinton when she was a Secretary of State who first used the term sex slavery in place of a comfort woman. So America comes very strongly on this score. But we got to understand, this is a separate issue. It's a humanitarian issue. It's a human rights issue. It's not a political security issue. So America, Washington, the United States, makes differences in between these different issues. Even Abe is going to Pyongyang because it's a different issue from this. And what we got to understand is each country is pursuing its national interests as best as they perceive it.
Exactly. Very interesting on changing dynamics in this region. But going back to this review of the Gono statement, do you think it's not exactly entirely embraced by Japanese people to begin with in Japan? Some of them are opposed to this. Do you think we can expect some sort of calls for changes or criticisms from Japanese intellectuals or academics?
We have witnessed already the rising opposition and criticism of the Abe administration undermining and potentially destroying the very proud and precious achievements made by his predecessors, not only confined to the issue of Japan's right to exercise collective self-defense, but the passage of the special secrecy law and the review of the Gono statement. So we have to wait and see how this grassroots intellectual and political movement would help change the stance of the Abe administration. In my personal opinion, the chance for the administration to pick up the voice of the grassroots activist is still very slim and small, but it goes at the heart of the whole issue. This is not just a history or territorial issue between Japan and other countries, but in essence, it is a question for Japanese people themselves. What kind of country they want their country to become? It tried the experiment of military imperialism, strong army and rich country, and it failed. miserably, causing a great deal of troubles, not only themselves, but also neighboring countries. And then, under the banner of Yoshida Doctrine, Japan tried to live as a prosperous country with no army. And these days, especially among conservatives and liberals who want to augment the international contribution of Japan as a democracy and country respecting human rights, to be a normal state with more capability to contribute to international security. So it is a question laid upon and in front of Japanese people, what kind of country they want to live. As a proud democracy, champions and advocates of the human rights, then their position with regard to this issue of the Kono statement and comfort women is a very critical window to look into.
The Tokyo recently announced that Korean government and the Japanese governments work closely together in coordinating the content of the Kono statement. Why would they say such a thing, and why it has caused such a diplomatic stir?
Well, first of all, I support the position of the Korean government that there is no coordination and collaboration between the two governments to decide the wording and the content of the Kono statement. If it were true, then Japanese government should be embarrassed because they decide not to exercise their own sovereign rights to decide upon the issue of historical and political apology. That is tantamount to saying that the Korean government wielded unlimited exercise upon how the Japanese government decided to understand and interpret the country's own past history.
Whoever can take my question here, do you think this disclosure of alleged political or diplomatic bargaining on this statement, do you think it can possibly lead some of the conservatives in Japan to demand a retraction of the statement at some point?
Well, it has been already tried by some conservatives in the media and the coalition government. But we have to wait and see because the director-level diplomatic meetings between the two governments focus on this specific issue of the apology and the admission of responsibility for the wartime sex slaves is still going on. So I don't think the Japanese government is ready to totally destroy this very nascent stage of the bilateral diplomatic channel. And aside from this director-level dialogue on this comfort women issue, there is no high-level official dialogue between the two governments. So why do you want to destroy something is at least working?
Do you think there was any mistake in South Korea's dealings with this issue regarding in terms of getting these the so-called comfort women the compensation or the closure or the solution that they could hope for?
It has been the Japanese government's position that the issue, how terrible and abhorrent it might be, has been officially and already settled by two measures. One is that the 1965 Basic Agreement and the creation of Asia Women's Fund that provided about 2 million yens, equivalent to the 17,000 US dollars per each victim who filed for the compensation. But the closure is in the eyes of the victim, not by the apologizing body. So many victims refuse to accept the money from the Asian Women's Fund because the Asian Women's Fund was not based upon the government money, but it was only made by the private donations. So these victims still insist upon the Japanese government to officially admitting its responsibility. And the Korean government also creates a lot of programs, national and provincial level, to provide the healthcare benefits and living expense support for the remaining victims. So for these poor victims who suffer for the tremendous amount of time waiting for their justice to be recognized. They do not need money. They can't even spend all the monetary benefits they receive from the South Korean government. They want recognition and admission of responsibilities. It's not a matter of monetary compensation. That's the bottom line.
Wartime sexual slavery victims continue to demand an official apology from Japan, having protested every week for the last 22 years. We had a chance to meet with some of them and hear their thoughts on Japan's recent review of the Kono Statement.
여기 맞아서 상처가 여기 다 있어 지금. 여기 머리에 상처가 있어. 그러는데도 지금 아베 정부는 그런 일 없다, 거짓말쟁이다 그런 게 아니라 정말 속해서.
그거 가는 얘기는 무시해 봅니다. 있지 않습니까 본인이 이렇게 있는데 본인을 놔두고 그렇게 얘기하는 그런 놈이 그거 뭐 옳은 말이라고 듣겠어요? 그만 언제든지 망언이죠. 어디까지나 망언이고.
배상을 하고 사과를 해야 돼. 그래야지 우리 후세들이 안 당하는 거야. 안 그래도 또 그 배상 안 받고 저 정인을 안 듣고 나면 한국 할매들이 거짓말쟁이다 또 이러는 거야. 우리 할머니들이 지금도 살았는데 얼마든지 이 문제를 해결할 수 있다.
The Japanese government has maintained an ambiguous attitude toward the issue, which has only served to further frustrate and harm those who were victimized.
Is it correct to consider the wartime sexual slavery issue that pertains to between Korea and Japan, or should it be considered as a global human rights issue?
Well, the right answer is both, but by portraying and framing as a global issue that touched upon the universal values of human rights would be a more correct way of approach the issue. It is not South Korea insisting upon very parochial and national interest by pressuring the Japanese leadership to more forthright and honest about the very terrible and unfortunate past. Korean women are women. They're humans. So the national identity of this victim should not be used or manipulated to cloud the importance of the issue to be properly addressed for the next generations to come, regardless of the nationality, by the way. Because never again, the remembrance of the Holocaust is not just confined to Germans or Jewish people, but it's an international issue that goes right at the heart and the core values of the international society.
One other reason it has to be multinational or international would be the fact that these women were not just from South Korea or Korea, but from China, Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, and many other multinationals. Because Koreans were the majority of the whole numbers, of course, but nevertheless, it is an international issue. It is not only issue of women's right or issue of human rights, but it is also it is an issue of war crime, and it is the issue of crime against humans, the humanity, like sex. Or the human trafficking, for example, that is all against the dignity of human beings. And so it is multiple nature of the issue, better be pursued and appealed to collectively rather than, although it has a certain nature of a bilateral relationship between the two countries, but nevertheless, if we involve other countries as well, it's going to be more, I think, effective. China just said, they started putting on their website all the war crimes regarding Nanjing rape and all other killings done by the Japanese people during the war. They are doing that. Foreign Ministry of South Korea is starting doing that. I think there are some people who are doing this kind of stuff on their individual websites and so forth. So I think this issue has to be heard. The gruesome nature of the crime that was committed against the poor young women has to be heard, and it has to be disclosed and more publicized, so that whole and they will, of course, will put more pressure on the Japanese government what to do about it. But one way of doing is we have to teach the generations, not just the Japanese, the posteriorities, but also elsewhere. So this kind of wholesome, I mean, there's a horrible things happen. We gotta see whatever we can do to stop this same kind of a thing happening.
Now we're getting different voices in this conversation. We're connecting to Grace Han Wolf, Herndon Town Council member in Virginia, to continue this conversation. She's taken a leading role in establishing comfort women monuments throughout the United States. Thank you very much for joining us today. Now, last month, one of these memorial monuments was built behind government buildings in Virginia. What meaning or significance would you attach to this?
I think it speaks to the growing importance of the Korean American community here in the United States, and also the recognition that Fairfax County and the Commonwealth of Virginia has made to really focusing on women's issues, human rights, and making sure that we're a real leader in that field. I think what it speaks to, again, is the importance the rising political power of the Korean American communities. You see the Comfort Women memorials that have been installed in New York and New Jersey, also in California, and this is the first installation here in the Washington, D.C. area, and the first one on a government property. And again, I think it really speaks to the importance of the community coming together and asking for our local governments to really make a stance on issues that are important to us. It's my hope that these memorials will continue to highlight the issue of human trafficking, because it's a problem that continues to plague both of our countries even in these days.
I know Japan has a strong reaction to these memorials. How does the U.S. feel about these recent tensions between Korea and Japan?
I think I can't really speak from the U.S. government perspective, but based on the recent letter that Congressman Mike Honda wrote to the Japanese ambassador about the Japanese government review of the Kono Statement, it seems quite clear that the U.S. has taken a very strong stance on the issue, that they are very supportive of the Comfort Women issue. The U.S. would like to see it resolved. I know here in Virginia, we don't dabble in international politics, but I know personally that it's a very important issue that I think many people would like to see resolved and would like to see the Japanese government continue to do the right thing.
And we've been talking about Japan's recent review of the Kono Statement in 1993. What are your thoughts on this?
I have to agree with Congressman Mike Honda. He and 17 other U.S. congressmen signed a letter to the Japanese ambassador that basically expressed a lot of regret about the Japanese government's recent review of the Kono Statement, which unfortunately took a very negative tone to some of the research behind the findings that created the Kono Statement. And I have to agree with Congressman Honda. It's very regrettable that the Japanese government would seek to undermine the thought and the thinking and the sentiment behind the Kono Statement. I don't believe that the Kono Statement has gone far enough, and I do hope the Japanese government does take more proactive and more powerful steps to really show their leadership on this matter, to really confront the past and to set an example globally that Japan really does care about women's rights and human rights. And I think that they should very carefully consider what they would like to do moving forward. I think all the affected governments and affected countries should work together, because I think it makes a very powerful statement. It's interesting to me that both Korea, China, and the U.S. have come out with strong statements against this Japanese government report regarding the Kono statement. So I think it's important for governments who want to work together to work collaboratively on this effort. And I do hope that the U.S. and Korea will take the lead on this and finally get this resolved. There are only 57 surviving comfort women. They're not getting any younger. I do hope to have it resolved within the next few years so they can be at peace.
All right, thanks so much for your time and insights there. Grace Han-Wolf, Herdon Council member, joining us from Virginia, U.S. Now, we're getting another voice in this conversation to talk about how the Abe administration's Kono statement review is being received in the U.S. Mike Honda, U.S. House of Representative for California, is joining us. Congressman, we really appreciate your time today. Now, let me first ask you, you and 17 other fellow representatives sent a letter to the Japanese ambassador to the U.S. on this issue. What did you say in this letter? And I wonder whether you got any response from the ambassador.
The letter that you referred to said that the timing and the release of the report was very regrettable and unfortunate. That letter distracts all of us from the plight of the Wiambu. And the report also suggests that the coercion by the Japanese Imperial Armed Forces to the comfort women remains unconfirmed. You know, that comment is unacceptable to me, and it upset me very much. And I urge the government of Japan not to alter the Kono statement. Yes, I heard back from the Japanese ambassador, and they said that they were not going to change the Kono statement. And so that was their comments.
What are your thoughts on the U.S. Finding itself in the middle of the Seoul-Tokyo diplomatic tensions?
I'm not sure that the U.S. government's in the middle. Actually, the direction of the direction to the U.S. government is to move forward with the issue with the Japanese government and continue to work with them to urge them to accept historical responsibility and to apologize to the victims of sexual slavery, and then also to place this information to the school books, because they have historically taken this information out of the textbooks that would have instructed the young people of Japan.
You played a critical role in passing a legislation on this issue of the so-called comfort women in the U.S. Congress. There are midterm elections coming up in a few months there. As a Japanese-American politician, are you taking any political risk?
No, this is not a political risk issue. It's an issue of human rights. It's an issue of respecting and avoiding and preventing violence against women. It's not a political. There's no political risk. If it were a political risk, it would have been risky in 1994 when I first brought it up as an assemblyman. And so it's, if anything, it is a opportunity to teach not only the public of Japan, but also the public here in this country of what had happened in Asia during 1930s and during World War II. We know a lot of information about what happened in Germany, and we know a lot of information about what happened in Germany after the war. But there's very little information about what happened in Japan and Asia during World War II and before World War II. And that's because we're not talking about what happened. We're not teaching people, and we have to raise the level of awareness much, much higher so that people will understand what happened. And then once they understand what happened, then hopefully that we will learn not to repeat that mistake again.
a lot of people and organizations have tried to help resolve the divide between Korea and Japan on the conflict women issue. But to no avail, what do you see as being the best way to improve the situation?
Well, I believe it's just the LDP leadership through Prime Minister Abe that has been resistant, and they're the dominating party right now. The DPJ and many members there have tried in the past to help us pass a bill that would accept historical responsibility. And I don't believe that every member of LDP feels the way that Prime Minister Abe does. And I don't believe that the general population of Japan feels the same way. They just don't know what the issue is. And so the purpose of doing this is to educate not only U.S. Citizens, but also the Japanese population. And I think that once people understand what happened and they get educated on it, they will say to the government, do the right thing. And the right thing to do is recognize their responsibility, apologize, so that the women, the victims, we can return back their dignity, return back some sense of peace and closure. We owe that to the women who were victimized, not only the ones that died, but the ones who are surviving still.
All right, Congressman, I'm afraid we'll have to leave it there for now, but thank you very much again for your time and insights. That was Congressman Mike Honda joining us from California, United States. So what do you guys think? What do you think? What kind of reaction do you think that we're going to get from the Obama administration on this issue? I mean, to Washington, Tokyo was not supposed to do something like this for the sake of the trilateral alliance thing that it's trying to have to rebalance in Asia.
Washington has a clear position on some of the issues, like war crimes or comfort women. That's very clear. Or Abe's visit to Yasukuni temple. They have, even U.S. ambassador to Japan, the Kennedy, said she was disappointed, and so did the State Department. Issued a similar statement later. And but this time it's very interesting because of other interests that U.S. has, bigger, larger interests than interest in a human rights issue. That is collective security. And when this thing popped up, that is revision or review, result of a review of the Kono statement was released, South Korean Vice Minister Cho Tae-yong went to Washington and met with his counterpart at the State Department, but there was no clear response from this issue this time, whereas when he met with members of Congress and other leaders, and he got very positive responses, reacting and disproving what the Japanese did at this time.
Why doesn't Japan simply offer an official apology like Germany did?
There is a theory called path dependency in political science, that your past decision will continue to generate or even limit options available to you in the present moment. Germany made a critical decision early on, which enabled the Germans to join the Europe again. But for Japan, it lost the window of opportunity that would have been liberating to its descendants in the future. So the absence of the critical decision made by the German leadership, but not by the Japanese leadership, has made all the differences between the two cases.
I think it's in human nature that the people want to forget the bad things that they did in the past, but it is harder to accept and admit what they did. I quote Obama again when he was here in Seoul last April. He said, "We can honestly resolve some of these tensions." When he said honestly resolve, meaning Japanese are simply not honest about what they did in the past. So that's Obama's point. You've got to be honestly deal with the issue and omit it. He didn't say omit it, but and why he said that? So that we can deal with the better, more important issues of the future, peace and prosperity for all people. So, in other words, this is really a very important impediment to the process of building, say, trust for peace in the East Asian region, as President Park Geun-hye is still pursuing. These are very important issues, have to be resolved first before we move on to next phase of international cooperation. And Japanese simply are not doing it. I don't think Abe will do it, knowing and watching him. He's not going to do it. So it got to be next administration of Japan. I think sometime it may come true.
South Korea and Japan have agreed to hold high-level talks on a regular basis. They to discuss the wartime sexual slavery issue. What is the likelihood that progress will be made?
There will be additional momentum created that will benefit the operation of that joint meeting. In the aftermath of the President Xi Jinping's visit to Seoul, both governments of People's Republic of China and Republic of Korea agreed to join effort to search and compile concrete evidence about the atrocities committed to the wartime sex slaves. So that will generate additional justification and support for the continued operation of these director-level meetings between Korea and Japan.
Would it be wise to hold a bilateral summit between Korea and Japan to improve relations, or is it better to take a strong stance against Japan if it doesn't show a willingness to change its attitude?
Well, again, I think it can be done both ways, or simultaneously for that matter. I think certainly South Korea will have to engage Japan on this issue and other security issues, other important issues like security issues, for example. But at the same time, on this humanitarian issue, issue of human rights, an issue of war crime, an issue against humanity, it'd be more effective if we have a collective, not collective security, but collective pressure on Japan. I think that's the way I would recommend for Korean government and other governments around the world should join the South Korean government in the same direction, in the same effort.
Well, if we're going to get any type of closure, we got to get it done fast because the timing is running out, and we are sort of running out of time as well. And I'm going to ask each of you for final thoughts or comments to leave this conversation with. Maybe I will start with you.
Sure. I'll just reiterate what I talked with my colleague at the Asan Institute on this issue. Why Abe administration decided to quote-unquote review the Gono statement while pushing to reinterpret the Japan's right to collective self-defense. Abe justifies his desire to reinterpret the Article 9 of the Japan's peace constitution in a fashion that would enable Japan to be a normal state. Saying that implies that there is something abnormal of Japan as a sovereign country. But what will make Japan a normal country will not its ability to exercise its collective self-defense, but it is genuine attitude to accept its responsibility as a proud, sovereign country based upon democratic values and respect for human rights that will enable Japan to be accepted as a normal country, not only in East Asia, where the victims of Japan's past military imperialism exist, but also at the global scale. So not apologizing is a very critical and unfortunate missed opportunity for Japan to be a more global, more normal country in the world stage.
Well, of course, the Japanese are saying they want to be a normal country. By that, they mean a country that can exercise the right to go to war. That does not make any country very normal either. But anyway, that said, I'm going to move on to Japanese interest in their abductees by the North Koreans. And Abe is even lifting some of the sanctions. It's Japan's own sanctions on limitings and traffic and exchanges, stuff like that. As Abe is convinced that North Korean team of the investigation of abduction issue appear to be genuine and they will make some result. If Japanese are so much interested in their own citizens, of course any nation would be, their plight and their fate, those kidnappees, they should have the same respect and same concern for citizens of other countries, and especially for the victims that they caused to be victimized. And they're the ones who did it. So they got to think of other people as well. But I think in conclusion, what we can do is, as we have discussed, I don't think Japan is making any progress or any, doesn't make Japan look any better by issuing kind of review of a Kono statement or adamantly refusing to admit the guilt on its own part. It's not going to help Japan, in my view. And therefore, until it does, I think there has to be more pressure on Japan, and that pressure has to be jointly done bilaterally and internationally, multilaterally, and through United Nations organizations and other places. And Chinese is already on board. I mean, he said that yesterday. He's going to take up the issue of comfort woman, for example. So more pressure on Japan. I think we can hope more chance for Japan to apologize sincerely and pay for it, not just feeling remorse, expressing remorse, but they got to do something in action as well.
All right. Well, thank you very much both for coming in today. Great conversation.
Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.